Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. Here on The Point of View, we get the right guests, we ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. It's live and interactive, and we expect your comments. If you're watching on television, send us your views on the number on the screen. If you're watching on any of the social media platforms, you can also send your comments on the stream. And we welcome our viewers who are watching us live on citynewsroom.com and citytv.com. We're also streaming there. And tonight's show is really the biggest issue in the world. It's about restrictions. And after 14 weeks of some restrictions, President of Ghana began what he called a phased easing of restrictions. I have three of the very best to delve into the pros and cons of his approach when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. So tonight we're going to be talking about the phased easing of restrictions, particularly on public gatherings. Don't forget, President initially started with banning public gatherings, church services, mosques, schools, and all of those things. Closed the borders. Then he did a lockdown for 3 weeks, opened the space again. Of course, this was in tandem with testing, tracing, and all the things that we've now become very familiar with. But last night he spoke to the nation and started a phased easing of restrictions. Tonight I'll be speaking to three people. I have joining me via Zoom, of course, Information Minister Kojo Oppong Nkrumah. Now, unbelievably, this morning started talking on radio probably around 6 o'clock, and less than 30 minutes ago he got off a final press conference. I don't even know when his day starts. Honorable Oppong Nkrumah, welcome to the show. Good evening. Wow. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate the work you do. We also have a former Minister for Health, Honorable Alex Segbefia, joining us via Zoom. Good evening, Alex. Wow. I like your pose. You look like you're in your living room. Good for you. I also have an international law and governance expert, Kwame Mfodwo, who's been really following this issue very closely. Kwame has some interesting perspectives to share as well. Kwame, great to have you. Good evening. Brilliant. So I'm sure there will be some sound issues fixed. Let me start with a quick recap of what the president said last night as he explained his approach to easing the restrictions. Here goes.
Fellow Ghanaians, with effect from Friday, 5th June, we will begin stage 1 of the process of easing restrictions. An abridged format for religious services can commence. 25% attendance with a maximum number of 100 congregants can worship at a time in church or at the mosque, with a mandatory 1 meter rule of social distancing between congregants. In addition to the mandatory wearing of masks for all persons at all times in churches and mosques, a register of names and contact details of all worshippers and hand-washing facilities and sanitizers must be provided, with a maximum duration of 1 hour for each service. Religious institutions that are desirous of opening their premises to their members, such as churches, mosques, and others, must disinfect, fumigate, and put in place the requisite logistics needed to guarantee safe opening and operationing. They must work with the designated regulatory bodies and undertake test runs of the protocols I have outlined. I would appeal to them, in the case of Christians, on the first Sunday of reopening, i.e. 7th June, in the case of the Adventists, Saturday, 6th June, and in the case of Muslims, on the first Friday, i.e. Salat al-Jum'ah, on 5th June, to dedicate their worship to prayers for the nation in these challenging times. The Minister for Religious Affairs will tomorrow, Monday, 1st June, outline in detail the specific guidelines for the safe reopening of our churches.
Okay, so that was the president. Now, subsequent to or after his presentation, the Minister for Chieftaincy and Traditional Affairs also held a press conference, actually at 7 p.m., so 2 hours ago, chaired by the Information Minister, to spell out the modalities. It's 8-page document. I'm not going to go through all that. Let me just start with the Information Minister to pick his key highlights, because there were other ministers there as well. There was the Minister for Communication as well, and then there were other officials of the religious bodies. So, Kojo, thanks for joining us again. I just wanted you to give us a quick overview, because in the morning we already heard from the president last night, and you also had told us in the morning about the main considerations from the president's speech. So, what in a nutshell did the Minister for Chieftaincy add to what we already know?
Bernard, thank you, and good evening to my colleagues who are joining us. I think what the Minister for Chieftaincy and Religious Affairs did was to break it down further for churches and mosques into the detail of what is required. And it's quite a tall list, which includes the types of hand washing facilities that are required, the type of waste management facilities required, toilet facilities, what they mean when they say disinfection and the regularity of disinfection, holding rooms for persons who may show high temperatures or other early warning signs, having the necessary marshals at these premises, kind of ventilation they should have, guidelines such as no handshaking, no hugging, no spitting, even what is required for the kind of singing sessions they may want to have. So it's a whole list, and as we mentioned, overnight we will be updating it on the Ministry of Information website and social media handles, so that the nation can interrogate it somewhat, provide some feedback.
So what was the role of the religious leaders in these details? Was it like some collaborative process, or they are now just hearing about these details?
No, so the entire exercise has been one of engagement with religious leaders. They brought a number of proposals that gave us a whole rap sheet of what they would prefer. The COVID-19 task force did the first layers of interface with them to tease out what we can allow and what we cannot allow. And in the end, yes, it was explained to them what will be announced in this first phase. It used to be 0. Now we're moving into a first phase, which we'll observe for at least about a month and have a certain sense of compliance and the risks associated with it. So it was not necessarily a surprise to them this evening, because they had already had the president announce the final decisions, but it also gave them an opportunity to ask for some clarification. I think we had the head of the Christian Council, Dr. Mafo, also asking for some clarifications. We had Reverend Professor Frimpong Manso giving some assurances in response to some questions that came up. So no, it wasn't a surprise to them, but the briefing gave them an opportunity to also weigh in on some matters.
Good. So tonight was on the religious gatherings. I'm guessing tomorrow's will be on the schools, and then you would pick other groups and do further briefings, right?
Indeed. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, the Minister for Education, Matthew Oppong, joins us with a whole rap sheet of what it means for the final year students who are going to write their exams, international students and all of that. Later during the week, the ministers for sports, the Minister for Sports, the Minister for Tourism, because there are restaurants, etc. involved, and other colleague ministers will also join us with their guidelines. And we'll be publishing all of these guidelines once they are done with the necessary announcements.
Brilliant. Let me take the views of former Minister for Health and then come to Kwame Mfodwo. So, Honorable Alex Segbefia, great to have you again. What do you make of where we are? It's been 14 weeks and a few of ban of all kinds of public gatherings, and yesterday we had the president. What do you make of where we are? Alex, if you can hear me, we can't hear you. If you could, I don't know if your mic is on or if there's something wrong with your, yeah. So Alex, you have to unmute your machine so we hear you.
I've done that.
Brilliant. So go ahead. Good evening. Welcome. Go ahead.
Are you with me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. First and foremost, can I say good evening to you, Bernard, and to my colleagues as well as your viewers. Can I, from the onset, say our position is not very different from where we've been, and that is, whatever decisions are made, we are of the view that it has more to social issues and economic issues. We do not believe these decisions are based on the science and the data, because we believe that there are issues with the data we have in the first place. And then secondly, even if you want to work with what you have, they do not give the story that is necessarily being painted at the moment by government. So we are clear in our mind that this decision is more on the basis of social interventions and economic interventions, just like the lifting of the lockdown, and not necessarily on the science. And I think that should be the narrative so that people know where they are and what is actually pushing us forward.
Okay, so are you saying that it's completely devoid of science, or that they have given more weight to social and economics than science?
No, I'm saying they've given more weight to social economics than science. And the reason we say that is that, let me just give a simple example. So we are looking at, say, for example, the positivity rate, which is you want to know the number of persons who have tested positive against the number of people who have been tested. But we at no point know on a daily basis how many people are really being tested. And we are still a bit concerned about the double counting, even though we had an explanation from Dr. Mfodwo. Because when we look at the data, which was on the Ghana Health Service site, we had a figure which we were very clear about, which was the people who came off the plane and was in a quarantine. Yet when you look on the website and you want to see the number of tests done for them, it came to 2,022 instead of 1,041. Now, those figures have never been reconciled. And therefore, it's clear to some of us that there has been some level of double counting, which is on because we do not even believe it. You remember there was a point when the president came, and in I think the last, the 9th or the 8th broadcast, where he said, Friday, this number of people were tested, this number of people were positive. Saturday, this is what happened, and Sunday, this is what happened. We were hoping that that would be a continuum, but it never went on. And so, in terms of the positivity rates, you cannot necessarily rely on it. But what is interesting, if you even took it, they have calculated it. On May the 1st, a positivity rate of 2.72. June the 1st, a positivity rate of 4.76. And in the last 10 days, the positivity rate has been 10.68, with some of the highest figures being in the last 3 or 4 days. So when you look at it from that point, we are definitely not going down as far as the positivity rate when you cast your net. And so if that is the science, even on the figures which we don't agree with, then it cannot be that we should be lowering restrictions. At the best, get more people, and the spread is greater. The positivity rate tells you how quickly it's spreading. And therefore, the spread appears to be growing. Alex,
thank you. I need to tell you that we're struggling with your sound because I don't know where you live, but your connection is not that great. But we'll try and fix it. But I think your point is very clear that you think the government has given more weight to social and economic than science, because using the example of the positivity rate alone, it's going up, and therefore, if anything at all, we should maintain the restrictions and not lower them. So I think that is a clear point. Let me take Kwame's initial remarks, and hopefully when I come back to you, you would have a better positivity rate with your internet. So, Kwame, what do you make of what do you make of where we are? I mean, inevitable that we had to lower the restrictions, or a bit premature, you think?
Okay, well, I've been on this program before. The last time that I was in this program, I was a very strong advocate of a quite comprehensive lockdown. And I was also of the view that the government had a responsibility to ensure that there was a maximum social support for all the people who would otherwise not be able to survive a lockdown. Now, as it happens, unfortunately, they did not follow up with the lockdown, which would basically have significantly reduced our numbers, despite whatever economic cost that might have generated. We're now in a situation where I personally think that the government is taking an extremely risky gamble.
Wow.
If they are lucky, they will pull it off and they will be okay. But my view on this is based very simply on the fact that the positive rates have not gone down. The positivity rates, as you know, in terms of what they've picked up from the contact tracing and the routine surveillance and so on, has not gone down. And also, most importantly, the strategy that the government is using now to manage the situation, which is basically principally masks. Masks are very, 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 very effective when done properly. At the moment, nobody in Ghana is seriously doing masks properly. So the government has a major problem. The strategy that they are relying on now is adequate, but it is not understood by people, it is not being complied with, and it is not being properly enforced. So it's a huge gamble, huge gamble. But I'll let the Minister for Information do what he has to do.
But let me push you there a bit. Let me push you there a bit, Kwame.
But I'll come back to some of these points shortly again. Thank you.
In terms of, Kwame, in terms of the numbers, what the government calls the dynamics of the disease, we've seen very low case fatality, probably the lowest in Africa, if not in the developing world. We've seen a very small proportion of people who are critically ill compared to those who are positive. In fact, a lot of asymptomatics. So we've not seen our hospitals overcrowded. Should that not give us some room for comfort? And does that not reduce the risk premium that you place on this strategy?
I don't think it does at all. Let me explain why. Basically, what the government has done is approach the thing as if there were not a number of, if you like, specific groups with specific needs. And I'll be quite frank. I mean, the current policy is one which favors younger people. It does not favor older people like me, simply because when we do get ill, those of us with hypertension, those of us with diabetes, and there's an enormous number of us amongst the people from 50 onwards, we will actually end up not in the mild category, not in the moderate category, but we'll end up in severe and critical. So one of the things that I'm actually going to be using this program to ask the government to do is to actually provide guidance for specific groups who are at risk. Because what is happening now is basically just a broad thing as if everybody's level of risk is the same. Now, one of the things, so the fact that the disease is generally mild is simply because it hasn't actually seriously reached people above the age of 50, people above the age of 60. And that is actually starting to show as the numbers rise, one person on ventilator, 17, severe, critical, and so on. So unless there is specific guidance on what the most vulnerable groups should do, how you organize yourself when you come home, how you make sure that your boots, your shoes, your clothes are clean, what you leave outside the house, what you bring in, this is the kind of direction and guide that we now need if this particular policy approach that we are following is actually going to be successful. It is not enough for the president to tell us that we should eat better. I mean, I have to be quite blunt and quite frank on this. Minister for Information, I'm saying that we need a targeted, focused mass media campaign which goes beyond the excellent conferences you've been having and giving, which are focused on health issues. We're now in governance. We're now in how do we manage a situation of risk and fear as the disease slowly inches up, because the numbers are not going to go down anytime soon. So I don't take, this whole narrative of recoveries and comparing Africa to Ghana to Africa and so on. No, it doesn't do it for me. The situation is much, much more complicated than that. One of the things that I personally would like to see is an age profile breakdown on everything. So we get some idea of how many people who are actually older are simply at risk.
Okay. Let me take...
My interest in this is obviously very clear.
Let me thank you, Kwame Mfodwo. I appreciate that. Now, Honorable Minister, 2 points to react to. Alex thinks you have given more weight to socio-economic than health. He gives an example of the positivity rate. And Mr. Mfodwo thinks you are taking a big gamble because people don't really understand how serious this is and they are not doing the masks properly. And he doesn't buy the argument that based on the dynamics of the disease, we are doing better. So if you can lump those two together, what's your reaction?
I'll just say that there are interesting perspectives that my colleagues have shared with us tonight. For example, this view that we are taking a risky gamble and that our strategy may be adequate, but has gaps because it's not being well enforced and requires some more guidance for specific age groups as is being postulated, I think is a fair request. We have always worked within the space where we engage with the public and various stakeholders, and depending on the request for further nuancing of information, we do well to make it available. And I don't think there's anything wrong, in all humility, receiving the feedback that maybe some more guidance for specific at-risk groups may be more helpful. It's not something we should reject, and I think it's some feedback that we should take. The other point also about the fact that it's a risky gamble, to that I'll say you take calculated risks in this enterprise. This enterprise, just a couple of days ago, I think, or just yesterday, the Americans launched another rocket to take somebody to the International Space Station. It's a risky gamble they took, calculated risk, but that is what you do in all of these matters. So yes, you take a calculated risk based on the data that you have. We have looked at the data that we have, which is what we often describe as the dynamics of the virus. It tells us something and gives us some comfort in how to attempt some easing of some restrictions. One of the pushbacks or criticisms we've had all day today from some of the groups is that we haven't opened up well enough, and that, for example, allowing 100 people to gather, be they religious services or other activities, is not so much of an easing up. And we're of the view that no, you have to be very gradual and calculated with it, so that you can spend maybe the next 3-4 weeks observing what happens even within this further opened envelope. So yes, it's a calculated risk you take, but you take it with the benefit of the data that is available to you. And the exercise of ensuring that there's improved enforceability is one that we concede we have to do some more work on, because this weekend, for example, I traveled to some parts of the Western region. And yes, you would agree that there are a number of people who are not observing some of the etiquette that we're talking about. So we need to get local communities and the police to step up and to do some work in that area. So like I said, it's good feedback. You don't have to reject it or argue with it. Alex argues that he thinks there's more weight on socioeconomic factors than science. But assuming without admitting that that was true, I studied social sciences in school. That would still be science, Alex. That would still be science. And indeed, what we are observing in how this virus is playing out in the ecosystem, be it on the health front or on other fronts, provides us with data altogether. I'm not sure that you are suggesting that when we say data, that we are talking only of health-based data, but it's data across board, which then allows us to come to a certain view. And for example, when we said about a couple of weeks ago that, listen, the virus is in the global ecosystem, an antivirus or a cure is not available yet, you can't lock down in perpetuity. You have to find some middle ground and find what you can ease on. Those are pieces of logic that we can string together based on the data that you have. So, Bernard, the contributors' points that they have made are not points that are necessarily throw away that they don't make sense. No, I think we can pick a number of things from it and continue to improve our work moving forward.
Thank you. This is the point of view. We're trying to find out whether the easing of restrictions is clear or whether it's recipe for chaos. My guest, Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, Minister for Information, Segbefia, former Minister for Health, Kwame Mfodwo, and International Legal and Governance Expert. When we come back, we'll ask my other two guests to push a bit more, because both of them seem to have a bit more ammunition around why they think this is not the best approach. We'll take their views and get some reactions from the minister as well. Stay with us. Back to the point of view. Tonight, we're trying to make sense of the president's phased easing of restrictions. Guest Information Minister Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, former Minister for Health, Segbefia, International Governance and Legal Expert, Kwame Mfodwo. Quick comments. Good evening, Bernard. I think the president's decision to send final year students back to school is quite worrying. It's a very risky thing the president has done. He should consider. Good evening, Bernard. I'm Abeku Daniels. I want to find out if children will be allowed to enter church premises with their parents amid the pandemic. And then I also want to find out from Oppong Nkrumah, with our borders so closed, how will the international students who went back to their various countries as a result of lockdown come back to take their exams? All right, we'll take some questions, but let me go back to Alex Segbefia. I'm really hoping his internet is better. Honorable Segbefia, welcome back. So you've made an initial point. I just wanted you to tell me more about why else you think that this is not the best approach the government is using.
Well, I'm going to try and speak slowly because I'm using more therefore I cannot use my installed internet, so I'm just using MTN. I do apologize better. The fifth point I want to make is this. The question I want to put to the Minister of Information is, has the government given up on ever going towards mass testing? Because actually, without mass testing, you don't really get the right data you need to make the best decisions. What we are doing is working.
Wow.
Into mass testing, we will then be in a position to
all right, we probably will have to put you on
where we
purely audio so we can save some sound. So if I hear
that is
you,
fine.
yeah, so my guys will probably just take your audio so we can hear you better. You raised the point about mass
testing.
testing.
Can you hear me?
It's not very good. So let me take Kwame whilst we fix that.
Okay.
Kwame, what you said you had a point you wanted to develop later. So if you could just give me some more meat onto your initial point.
Yes, okay. Let me actually start off, or rather, let me restart by saying that I think that the government has done a really, really good job on the technical health, medical management of this thing. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you're on. Go ahead.
Yes, okay. So I think the government has done, the government and the medical team, the medical management team, all the people involved in the health and medical management side have done a really, really fantastic job. Let me put that very clearly down as a marker in the ground. I am, however, now going to be critical now that I've actually indicated what I think has been done really well. Now, where there has actually been a problem, and that is something that's to some degree understandable, but of course, because it's a crisis, one has to make these points and hopefully they'll be taken on board. You see, because the whole thing started off within a health management, public health frame, I think that along the way, the governance, the socioeconomic, the political, all those things which actually also require their specific focus and guidance. They're actually in some ways more complicated than the health. As you actually do the health, certain things become clearer, certain epidemiological things, trends, all those things that Minister Nkrumah was talking about, all those start sorting themselves out. But it's the governance of the social and the economic, which is messy. And here, there have actually been some quite significant problems. I mean, for example, there should be, even just in terms of the structure of what you do in terms of your public education stuff, there should be a clear segment which basically says, yes, hey guys, we are now very clearly moving from the health to this A, B, C, D. You started off doing that when various ministers, Alima and others came forward. You orchestrated it quite nicely. And then the health thing took over. And in that space, all sorts of rumors, all sorts of fake news and so on. So my suggestion and my very serious advice to you is this, that for this next phase, you need to set up a clear, well-structured website, linked to everything, Twitter, all those things. And it's really a kind of a program of support of this period of fear and restriction, which is social, governance, political. And people, and also all these guidelines, these church guidelines All these things need to be there very clearly so that people can go to them, they can become clearer about what they are supposed to do and so on. Because quite frankly, with the church stuff, for example, leaving it in the hands of some of the bourgeois pastors that we have, we're just going to have major problems. You need to have an inspection team. The churches are the main problem as super spreaders. I'm not saying this because I don't like churches. It is a historical fact from CDC and so on. Churches are major spreaders. South Korea, Germany recently, yesterday, the United States, and so on. There have been so many examples. And in fact, the church stuff is a real problem because they're going to try and cut corners, because for some of these people, it's about making money. So you need to have an inspection team. You need to have random checks on people. They need to be aware that you might turn up at any time to see whether they're having 100 people or not, right? And when you catch somebody, you need to close them down. And it does not matter whether it is Duncan Williams or it's Dag or anybody else. You shut them down. Because if you don't, we'll have this huge crisis and all these things about elections and all these hopes. Quite frankly, it will all come to naught. Now, so you've done some really great things, but there's all sorts of gaps that you have to fill. And your mass media campaign, maybe I'll just make this last point, and then obviously, I mean, you know, I'll have to relax for a little while. But now, one of the things which is really critically missing is this. You're trying to sell Ghanaians new ways of behavior. You need to get somebody who is superb at selling a new product. Do you understand me? You're selling a new product, which is a mix of masks and all sorts of things. It should be done in music. It should be done in cartoons. Ajako should be doing his own version. Nana McBrown should not be doing a food show. She should be doing her version of fashion. And I'm going to be really funny and say maybe we even need the slay queens doing some of this stuff, because you have to reach every segment of the population and sell them a new product. So get an advertising executive to sit together with the public health people. We've got some massively successful advertising executives, and let's do a proper marketing campaign.
Okay.
Different segments of the population.
Let me push you.
Thank you.
Let me push you a bit on that. Some people think that to open up, you need to let people see the risk of opening up, so they are afraid.
Pardon me, could you say that again? I didn't hear you properly.
Some people say before you open up, a message of fear may be better than a message of assurance and calm, because the more people are afraid, the more they conform to the masks and the sanitizing and things. So that for the government to be saying spread calm, not fear, is almost antithetical to opening up, because once you tell people everything is okay, they throw caution to the wind. But if you tell them that, look, this is vicious virus out there is going to kill you, that message which pushes fear can actually help them behave better in terms of what we want them to do. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that, you see, I mean, for example, Lil Wayne and Ejako doing a skit, right? Okay, is one which won't spread fear. It will make people laugh, but it will make people think. You see, because we have to get people thinking about the issue, not necessarily that they are scared, but thinking about the issue with confidence, knowing that when they come home, these are the steps A, B, C, D that they need to take. What do you do with your clothes? What do you do? It's not just washing your hands. You see, I mean, we're coming back to the specific guideline stuff. Now, what the government has done to date is they've looked at it from the point of view and consulted the occupational groups, the bishops, the owners of A, B, C, and D, and so on. Now, the other thing which now needs to be done is, what is the specific behavior of the most difficult groups, and what is also the behavior of those who want to conform but are confused and are not informed? You see, so we've got to flip it now and do more study which looks at what are people actually doing in Ashama, what are people doing in Jamestown, what are people doing in Wa, what is it that we need to get them to actually shift, so we all conform towards the mean.
Great.
You see?
Thank you.
So this is the next stage.
All right.
And it will be a mix of calm, it will be a mix of humor, it will be a mix of fear. But people have to feel comfortable, informed, confident, assured. And at the moment, they are not informed.
Great. Before I take Kojo's response to that, I think I'll try Alex again. He was making a point about testing. So thank you, Kwame. Alex, I wanted to check if I had you better on the sound.
Can you hear me at all?
Better. So you're making a point about testing. What were you saying?
I'm saying that in terms of the data, till you actually go to and I was putting the question to Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, that look, are there any plans by the government to go to an era of mass testing? Because without mass testing, you're not going to get the right data you require to make the decisions that we need to be making. It's bad enough that we are not happy with the data that we have, but to actually, even if we had the data and we felt it was accurate, it will still not be the best data you can get. And that is why many countries are trying to have moved those that are trying to get on top of this virus to a point where they are doing mass testing so they can have an idea. Also, there's the concern that, for example, this epidemic, before you make certain moves, you want to be sure that the epidemic is under control. And we are not sure that that is the case in terms of the impression that is being created. You need to you look at some of the letters, nobody's giving clear explanations. But when hospitals are saying, look, we are under some stress and we need beds to be looked at and stuff, and everybody's saying, well, it's not true, but they should ask the hospitals and stuff. That's not the type of answers we require. You then need to also then look at the public health preparedness. We notice that the contact tracing is reducing. Where the last 2 days or so, we had the doctor talking about backlogs again, when we are supposed to do polling. So you wonder what's happening with this backlog. Are we going back to backlogs again? And so there's that area which also has to be clarified. Then, even though we have 10 testing areas now, then you have to know do we have health systems readiness? Hospital staff, the rate of infection of hospital staff, which seems to imply that they are not insufficient PPEs. If this is also happening, you then have to ask yourself, if this gamble doesn't pay off, and for any reason, we have to start ramping up to look after people, are we in a position to do this? And unfortunately, the science does not tell us that we are. What was significant about the president's speech for some of us was this. He put a lot of reliance on telling Ghanaians, please, 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 this is the time for us to get serious. The more we reduce restrictions, you have to really adhere to the protocols. But the one thing that has been clear through all this is the indiscipline of the Ghanaian. If there's nothing that is clear, it's the indiscipline of the Ghanaian in not adhering to the protocols. That is the issue. It's a big issue. And for even those who were never under the lockdown in Accra and Kumasi, there is a belief that even the thing doesn't exist. So even though it has gone into the regions, as a country and with the population we have, it is not yet hitting because people don't see the mortality rate going at the rates which other countries have. And that type of comparison can put us into a false sense of security. And with the way the government is also sometimes giving out the message, there's caution, but there's also the need to give some kind of optimism. And that is a double-edged sword, but one has to be careful with it. And look, I want to go to church. People want to go and possibly one day watch a football match, etc. But health first. And the important thing about the issue is that, going back to what Dr. Mfodwo was saying, the most vulnerable are the elderly who have diabetes and hypertension, as the president said. But the only places where our elderly people tend to go is to a funeral of a close friend or to church. These are the two most important functions. They rarely go out for other functions, possibly outdoor rigs, etc. But it's those kind of family social events. And if you don't have right protocols, for the first time, they've all been indoors. Our elderly folk have been indoors. They haven't gone anywhere. they've sent other people to do shopping, etc. Now that the lockdown has been lifted, if you don't give proper protocols for those vulnerable groups and they step out, if it hits, it will not hit in a way which would happen in the first round. We should also be alive to the fact that in other countries, we've seen that it starts going down and then it comes back again.
All right.
It starts going down.
Alex, you've made a lot of points, so let me get some reaction. Mass testing,
okay, sure.
Mass testing is not the strategy. Contact tracing, contacts are coming down. Health officials are getting infected and suggesting there's no PPEs. The vulnerable are not being protected. And then Kwame makes points about communication. Let me come to Kojo. So, look, sorry I'm making this like a back and forth, but I think the two are raising key points that you need to react to. So, if you've taken note, I think you should start with Alex because more recent and it's fresh in our minds, and we'll go to Kwame. What are your comments on what Mr. Segbefia said?
Bernard, I think there are only about 2 or 3 real issues that I have to react to. As I've mentioned, we are not ones to reject good feedback, but maybe 1 or 2 or 3 matters that ought to be responded to. First is this very direct question from Alex, whether government has given up on the possibility of mass testing. I think the answer is no, government has not given up on the possibility of mass testing. But you need to approach that possibility with some analysis. It's like talking about evacuating Ghanaians back into the Ghanaian jurisdiction. You can't walk into it blindly. You've got to do some deep dives. So, for example, what is this whole concept of mass testing and what does it really do? Is it a preventive mechanism or what? The thing about testing, and maybe the overflow of our own communication that we're going to do a very heavy testing of at-risk populations, has also led people to believe that testing is a panacea and that people testing negative is some sort of solution per se, because that is not the case. The reality is that you could test negative right now, and as you exit the test facility, pick up the virus. So testing is not a panacea. What we have therefore sought to do is to test what we call at-risk populations, because there's a clear mapping of where the virus is, the persons who are at risk, and therefore you're able to concentrate your resources even under this enhanced testing structure. You're able to concentrate your resources within what we call these at-risk populations. So it is not as though mass testing necessarily means that all the persons who test negative are safe of something. It only means that at the time they were tested, they have not contracted it. But you can achieve the same by testing at-risk populations and combining it with the preventive etiquette that you need to put in place so that people actually protect themselves. Else you are heading towards a conversation of herd immunity, which I'm sure you know.
But Kojo, quickly on testing. Quickly on testing before you go to the other point.
Go ahead.
For example, in the European leagues, they test the players before they reopen. Some are asking, why aren't you testing students before final year students before allowing them back into school, so we know who has the virus or not? Why aren't you doing that?
2 things. So just like I explained to you, testing itself is not a panacea. It is the kind of social distancing, the kind of preventive etiquette generally that you do, in addition to the testing of at-risk populations. That gives you a combined effect that amounts to some layer of protection. For example, as we started approaching this conversation of reopening the schools to some level, one of the initial requests that came up was test everybody. That's about 9.4 million students only. If you add teaching and non-teaching staff, you could be going around 10 million thereabout. So some say test everybody. The question becomes, because the reality is that you can test negative today and pick up the virus just this afternoon or tomorrow morning. If you test 9.4 million people at $50 per test today, are you going to test them tomorrow? What about the day after or the 3rd day? So the real issue is how you put in place the preventive etiquette and the prevention layers that can protect them. And should you have an unfortunate incident, how you can quickly move in. So for example, the final decision was 1st year, 2nd year, 3rd year students in the universities don't need to go to school. The final years that are writing examinations need to go to school. Now, if you have the same university infrastructure and you have a quarter of their population coming in, and you are therefore able to spread them all over in lecture halls and in accommodation facilities, after you have disinfected these facilities and you're providing water and soap and sanitizers and masks, etc., you are at a more efficient point of prevention and still allowing that final thing of writing the exams to take place. So it is in the midst of this that you examine all the parameters, and like I say, you take a calculated risk that essentially says that, listen, it may not be prudent to test 9.4 million kids that are going to school once. If you're going to test them, maybe you should test everybody every morning. Can you feasibly do that? You can't do that. So how do you walk a nice middle line that allows you to achieve that efficiency in the support that you're looking for? The other thing that, for example, my colleagues talk about, and Kwame mentions the fact that he appreciates the work we've done on the health front. He thinks we should begin to shift gear towards more of a governance framework. And within that governance framework, attack some things more head-on, including communication, as he talks about. As I've mentioned earlier, we like feedback. Feedback is good. It's the cheapest way to get consulting services, so we're happy to get feedback. But you would notice, Kwame, and I am not sure, for example, if Kwame watched our press briefing tonight, because if he did, what he may have noticed is that we have shifted back into a strong governance framework. And he alluded to the fact that initially it appeared to have a health focus, then we opened up to a broader governance framework, and then it appears to have gone back to a health focus. And he's suggesting that we broaden it up again to a governance framework. That's exactly what's happening. Now that you are realizing we are beginning to move back into some easing, as I mentioned, tonight, the minister responsible for religious affairs has been with us. We are publishing a whole set of guidelines and moving into a communication within the communities with those guidelines to get compliance. Tomorrow morning, education is going to take the center stage. There's a whole elaborate education program on back to school. Bernard, did you know that, for example, after Ebola, they discovered that close to about 30% of female students in places where schools had to be closed down could not go back to school because there were lots of underlying challenges, including pregnancies, etc. And you now need to do a very strong education exercise to get people back into school, even including young girls, some of who may, for example, be taking seed or carrying seed. All of those are parameters we've had to program for and have had to begin to work communication material towards. And so as we get into this space, you will begin to find us opening some more in that space. Remember that until recently, when we were focusing on the dynamics of the virus, it was a health-focused exercise. And so all your energies and your resources had to go in that particular way. As you begin to open up a bit more, you have to bring in some of these considerations. So okay. I hear my colleagues in very good faith. And I don't think that we are necessarily on different wavelengths. I think what we have to do is to ensure that the gaps, one of the gaps that we are even very worried about is the gap of compliance, or that full level compliance that we desire. And we need to have to work strongly to ensure that that compliance takes place.
Thank you. We'll take another quick break. This is the point of view. We're trying to just wrap our minds around the phased easing of restrictions. Guest Kwame Mfodwo, international legal and governance expert, Segbefia, former Minister for Health, Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, Minister for Information. When we come back, we'll take final comments. And a lot of comments you've sent in for particularly the minister. I'll read them to him and take some reactions. Stay with us. Welcome back to the point of view. We're talking easing lockdown, easing restrictions in a phased manner. Information Minister Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, former Minister of Health, Segbefia, governance expert Kwame Mfodwo. Here are some of your reactions. Hello, Bernard. Can you ask the minister if my church has 1,000 capacity and I hold service with 500 because there will be enough space for physical distances? Can I do this? Another one. The whole pandemic issue is something that bothers all of us. The disease that didn't differentiate. So I suggest those at the helm of affairs shouldn't shun any good idea from other people. They should have a listening ear. I think this is what the minister has done. In the circumstances, the best approach the government could have used is the phased easing of restrictions. COVID-19 has become part of our ecosystem, and the earlier we adapt new strategies for living with the disease, the better. Yakubu. And then more comments. Wow. Bernard, ask the Information Minister what will happen to schools serving as quarantine centers. Example, St. Augustine's College and Cape Coast Nursing Training School. 2. Are parents supposed to pay for this semester again since it was interrupted? Already, we are receiving fees for third term for final SHS students who should have completed school by now. When is government paying the 50% to health workers? Why is the rapid testing cases not available to the hospitals? Kojo, what happened to rapid test kits? Because that was a big conversation a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So the brief I have is that the sensitivity levels of, first of all, what has been done in Ghana and then part of what has been brought into the jurisdiction is still not where we would desire it to be. When it comes to RDTs, you want sensitivity levels, nothing shy of maybe about 95, 98%. It appears that what they are getting has wide insensitivity gaps, and they are worried that they may be having very high levels of false negatives or false positives as a result. And so they still need to do some work before they're able to recommend an RDT that can work within our case. There's a question about 500 people or more in the church auditorium. Let me quickly take that away. So you see, we are at 0 now. We can't, and we hear the feedback we get from our religious leaders, etc. Some say they have congregations of 10,000, etc., and therefore they can do a quarter of that. But we can't move from 0 to 2,000 or 3,000 at a go. And so the decision is to start off with a maximum of 100, no matter the size of your auditorium. Even if you had the auditorium as large as a Crasport Stadium, a maximum of 100 for now. It is how we observe the preventive etiquette, the distancing protocols within this limited number and observe same. That gives us the confidence to say, why don't we go to 400 or to 500 or to 1,000 or to 2,000? But as we are beginning to ease up, we can't start off with large numbers. On the south side, what we're saying is that about a quarter of your congregation, if you are observing the social distancing, and that means 20 people in the
Kojo, I watched Jameshit and then in Siansari tonight. They said you can do multiple services.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So what we are saying is that you can't have 100. You can't have more than 100, but you can do up to 100 within that 1 hour, because the science is leading us to understand that we don't want you in a mask within a church closed environment for more than an hour. That's the science behind the 1 hour. But once we're done with that 1 hour, if there's another cohort of worshippers that want to be in the mosque or in the church, they can do another 1 hour. And you are not limited in the number of multiple services you can do. But a cohort of about 100 that has a register, wearing masks 1 meter apart, observing what we are being asked to observe, it's a good beginning that we can monitor and use as a basis to ease some more. Balance is one of the key words.
Alex, I'm going to give you a minute to make your final point, and I'll also give Kwame a minute and a half to make his final point.
My final point is simply a question to Kojo. It's interesting, and therefore they should have some explanation for it, that the government has taken copious detail on what should happen in churches and schools, but have given absolutely no guidelines for the Electoral Commission or for the National Identification Authority. What are they going to be doing about that?
Okay.
I'd like to respond.
Okay.
So first of all the guidelines that have been applied to general gatherings, etc., in terms of the numbers, preventive etiquette, etc., they all apply to the Electoral Commission. You are not going to have, or I don't see how you're going to have the Electoral Commission gather more than 100 people in a place at a point in time. It cannot happen under these guidelines that we have given. And I think some persons are interpreting the fact that we did not give a whole rap sheet to the Electoral Commission beyond what we've generally said to mean that they have a carte blanche. Remember, ideally, they are supposed to be independent organizations. And if you read the Constitution, in the performance of their task, you can't even be dictating too much to them. So the general guidelines that we've given apply. Within that, they themselves, and that's why the president hinted at it, are required to come up with the details in the light of their independence. That would ensure that they don't put people's lives at risk. And I think that we can all police them so to do. But this conspiracy that there's an effort to give the EC some extra room to do something that all of us are not allowed to do, I think should be discarded.
All right. Kwame, you have the final word.
Okay. So basically, I just want to say two very quick things. One about masks, and the other one about vertical buckets and other methods of washing hands and ensuring hygiene. Basically, we're talking about having to live with these things, so the government has to ensure that there is a mass supply of masks going forward for the public to purchase at cost. okay? Cost and a little plus. The people who distribute it, maybe make a little profit, but it must be at cost so that we can continue to make masks. It cannot be free. It cannot be too seriously subsidized, but the costs are not that high. So price control, I know it's a bad word, but price control on top of the mask. So a little bit for the distributor, but pretty close to cost price, so we can keep on having masks.
All right.
Otherwise,
Thank
this
you.
strategy of yours is going to fall apart.
Thank you,
because
Kwame.
the masking is central to your current strategy. My last point.
No, Kwame,
is
you don't have time for a
Veronica
last point. The time is up. Thank you very much, Kwame Mfodwo.
Okay. Veronica buckets.
I hear
in
you.
Compound houses, and masks in compound houses as well.
Thank you, Kwame Mfodwo, governance and legal expert. Alex Segbefia, former Minister for Health. Thank you. Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, Minister for Information. We hope you've learned something. This is going to continue. And of course, on Tuesday, you're going to hear the press conference on the Education Minister. If you're watching this in the afternoon on Tuesday, that happened a few hours earlier. My name is Avle. Thank you for watching tonight's edition of The Point of View. We'll be with you next time. Bye-bye.